start the recording. Hello, I am pleased to call to order the meeting of the Cuyahoga County Administrative Rules Board. For the benefit of those watching this electronically, we are meeting in Committee Room B on the 4th floor of the County Administration Headquarters Building at 2079 East 9th Street in Cleveland, Ohio. Notice of this meeting was previously provided to the public by the board's clerk, Audrey Buckholtz. For those wishing to access agendas, minutes, and proposed rules and amendments to rules online, please visit the county's Administrative Rules Board homepage. Click on the Meeting Calendar tab, and then click on the agenda items for any given meeting. Many thanks to our most excellent clerk for keeping us so organized. Thank you. Clerk Buckholtz, would you please call the roll for this meeting?
Rick Maniloff,
Present.
Awatif Assad, absent. Walter Parfiowitz,
Here.
Greg Huth,
Here.
Nora Hurley, absent.
All right, we have a quorum, which is as 3 members of the ARB, so we can proceed. Clerk Buckholtz previously circulated the minutes of our October 3, 2024 meeting to the members of the ARB after reviewing them with me. Is there a motion to approve said minutes? Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All right. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, the motion carries. The minutes are approved of the October 3, 2024 meeting. Are there any individuals who would like to comment on the 2 substantive agendas on items, I should say, on the agenda? I don't see anyone in the audience, so we will dispense with that particular agenda item. Next on the list is items under consideration for adoption, potentially under the waiver of the 2-reading rule. In accordance with our rules, the substantive items on this morning's agenda, and there are 2 of them, are to be presented by a duly authorized representative from the requesting department, which presentation shall encompass 3 things. 1, a description of the proposed rule and its impact on county operations or the general public. Number 2, a statement of the requested action of this board, such as adoption, amendment, or rescission, and in this case, the proposed requested action is adoption. And number 3, a response to any commentary submitted by a member of the public. As to the first requirement, the duly authorized representative from the requesting department, we have with us this morning Lee Tucker, who is the Assistant Fiscal Officer in the Fiscal Department, who has primary knowledge of the rules proposed for adoption this morning. As to public commentary, before we proceed with the presentations on the items on today's agenda, I would ask Ms. Tucker and Clerk Buckholtz whether you are aware of any written commentary on the agenda items that was delivered by the deadline of 10:30 a.m. today.
I am unaware, Lee Tucker, Assistant Fiscal Officer of Cuyahoga County. I am unaware of any comments or questions regarding the agenda that's being presented today.
Okay, Clerk Buckholtz.
I also did not receive any, I'm not aware of any comments.
Very well. Then we can proceed with item 1. Ms. Tucker, would you please present on the proposed rule entitled Uniform Guidance for Federal Programs 2 CFR 200 Subpart D? Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm here to present a written policy that we had drafted in response to prior audit management letter comments. And the auditors of the state had, as far back as I can tell, probably at least to 2018 or before, had recommended that the Cuyahoga County adopt written policies and procedures related to uniform guidance of federal programs. Specifically, it was programs 2 CFR 200 Subpart D. and that is to help us monitor any federal programs that we have. So this is what we drafted in the fiscal office, a policy in response to the management comment letters. And basically, it is just directly taken from the uniform guidance policy that's been established by the federal government. This policy has been vetted by the auditor, by our external auditors, Clark Schaefer Hackett. They reviewed it once I drafted the policy, and it has also been reviewed by the previous Director of Internal Audit. Once the policy has basically been drafted and it has been submitted to the end users, which are the departments, agencies, and boards, to adopt, but the policy hasn't been formally adopted by the Ministerial Rules Board. So once it's formally adopted, we will submit the policy out again, and then we will provide training to all the end users. So this is just a request for adoption at this point. Are there any questions?
Well, I guess, yeah, if you could just describe a little bit of the substance of this policy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, what are a
So
few
ba-
of the specific things that this
so-
policy encompasses?
Yeah, so basically, this policy is mainly concerned with cash management, what constitutes allowable costs, and time and effort in the procurement. So those policies encompass those 4 topics. The policy actually gives directions on how to process and what cash management, allowable cost, time, and efforts, and procurement looks like. It gives the high-level policies of what those are. It has various schedules, and it goes a little bit more in-depth than what is required. Some of the things that we go into is like how the information should be reported, how to audit sub-grantees, what constitutes something that goes on the schedule of federal awards, which is a CFA, which is any amount over $750,000. That's the part that's encompassed in Part 1. It also identifies what is considered a federal fund, how you should account for inventory, who's responsible for accounting for various transactions, and how those transactions should be recorded on our books, as well as reported to the awarding entity. Are there any additional questions beyond
Okay.
that?
I think I have a few, but I'll start with my colleagues. And for the record, Watif Assad joined us midway through your presentation, Ms. Duncan. So any comments or questions from those before I start digging in?
No, I just add something that, a lot of what Lee has in this guidance is subrecipient monitoring. We get a lot of grants and things that come through the county, and the county subcontracts with other vendors to perform a lot of different services.
Yes.
This is basically guidance as to how they're gonna monitor a lot of these awards that we receive from the state and federal governments, and, how we're gonna process. And this is nothing, I don't believe this is anything that's truly new. It's just Lee's now formalizing this by bringing it to this board.
Because actually, thanks for that, Walt. This is a requirement of the federal government, and this information is actually on the government's website. That's why we had never formally finalized any policies, because we felt like anybody who received federal grants could actually go out to the federal government's website and get this information. But, the auditor was pretty insistent, like, even though this information is available to everyone, the county needs to formalize this in writing. So hence, that's what we did. And as part of our documentation, we do provide a link to the federal government's website, so that if someone's unclear, they can always ask us, but they can also go to the federal government's website for some guidance as well. But when we do our training, we will provide detailed information and answer questions that someone may have, that they might go to the website of the federal government and they're still kind of fuzzy. We will provide answers to those questions.
Thank you. That actually answered one of the questions that I had. So I wanted to spend a few seconds on like like you said, subrecipient monitoring. There's a lot in here about subrecipients, so, is the county considered the pass-through entity in all of this, and the quote-unquote subrecipient is the entity receiving our grant money, or is it one step beyond that, and/or, I guess, is it one step beyond that, where we provide grant money through council action to an entity, and then they, in turn, sub-grant to a sub-recipient, if I'm making myself clear.
Yeah, it could be both, but usually what this is us getting, especially this uniform guidance policy, is usually us getting money from a federal government, and we're like the pass-through entity. So we would give money to, I'm just gonna use Cleveland Housing Network, for example. If we got some dollars maybe from HUD, we would sub-grant out dollars to Cleveland Housing Network. So the sub-recipient monitoring policy tells us like what kind of information that you need to get from Cleveland Housing Network, how frequently you need to go in and audit them, and what an audit of their records actually involves. Now, when you reference getting money from council.
Well, I was just mentioning like a grant be given through an act of council, and I'm going to come back to council in a second. But let's run with your Cleveland Housing Network example for a second on the recipient, subrecipient piece. So could Cleveland Housing Network, like, I guess, move that grant money to another entity, like a sub-recipient, and then how does that get monitored, and who's on the hook if something goes wrong? Is it the recipient that we gave the money to, or is it us?
Correct. And then there's guidance regarding that as well, when the subrecipient subs out the work, because a lot of times they will. So there's information around that. Now, as far as council dollars, if the council, say, for instance, gives $1 million that they have from the general fund, no, that's not covered under this. This is strictly federal dollars that's received. Now, that will be under a different part of the policy, which is the grants policy. That's a different thing, but this is basically federal dollars that this is referencing.
Okay. And staying with council, at the very beginning of the policy, I see it says, second paragraph, the county council directs the fiscal officer to develop, monitor, and enforce effective financial management systems and other controls over federal awards. So I was just wondering where that is. Where did county council direct the fiscal officer?
Yeah, I will have to get back to you, but I believe that's part of the county code, section 1. I don't know what section that is, but I'll get it back to you. It is part of the county code.
Okay, I should have
That's part
looked
of
that
what
up in
the
advance.
fiscal officer is tasked with.
Okay, all right. And, other than a stray reference to Lucas County in here instead of Cuyahoga, which is just a form anyway, not a big deal at all. I read through it and understood as much as I could. Does anybody have any other, I guess, comments or questions? Awatef.
Hi, Lee. Good morning.
Good morning.
Let me just voice my support for these policies being introduced here today. I particularly appreciate the proposed provisions and language regarding the identification and management of risks and associated with this process, right? Of those participating in our grant process. These policies are the type of risk assessments and analysis at the heart of our efforts to create enterprise risk management, as we discussed before, throughout the county. So bravo to you. We recently saw, the city of Cleveland being penalized by the IRS and federal government, for over $400,000 for failure to implement proper management procedures for bond funds. There was no system to properly red flag this or oversight. So we now know that there's $400,000 that is not going to city programs. So again, I applaud you and your staff for implementing these policies with the requisite internal controls. which will go a long way to mitigate financial enterprise risks in the county.
Thanks.
So with that, I just have one comment, substantive comment, regarding your attachment 4, checklist for on-site monitoring of subrecipient community development block grant program. And direct you to the 3rd page, section E, insurance.
Okay.
Here you have, which is great, has a subrecipient submitted a current copy of its COI. And 2 is a city, it would be the county.
Okay.
Cuyahoga County, named as an additional insured. And I would also add waiver of subrogation in favor of the county, and the policies be written on a primary and non-contributory basis. These risk transfer provisions have been part of the county's insurance requirements for decades.
Okay.
And I will reach out to you to explain further, maybe offline, and also alert you that we are having a virtual training on the county's insurance requirements on November 1st, and I can send you the link to that. And you
Please.
can pass it
Okay.
along to anyone who is
Absolutely.
working
Okay.
on this.
Thank you. Thanks, Yowadif. Okay, I'll make those updates, Lucas and City. Okay.
Very good. And just coming back to the one question that I did have, going back to your Cleveland Housing Network example, let's say they sub out a portion of a grant program, and something goes wrong. That sub, I don't know, runs off with the money or something like that, doesn't provide the services as required. So then, who's on the hook? Who's responsible for that? Does the county have kind of oversight over this, or is Cleveland Housing Network, in your example, on the hook for that, and the county is not on the hook at all in that example?
In my example, the subrecipient would be on the hook for that, because they contracted out with that third party. So
Okay.
our obligation is with the subrecipient.
Okay.
And then the subrecipient, any work that they contract out to a third party, they would be on the hook for the work that they contracted out with a third party.
All right, so there's no rule in here that requires us to monitor and supervise these sub
No.
contracts? Okay, all right, thank you for answering that question.
But on that point, I mean, if that sub doesn't perform, and the sub that we gave the money to doesn't fix it,
The-
we're on the hook.
We, the sub.
But if they
the-
don't, I mean, because I went through this. in the
Where
past,
the sub didn't pay us back? 'Cause
Yeah,
most of our
not
grant-
here, but at the
right,
city,
But,
so it-
yeah, but most of our grants are like on a cost reimbursement basis, so the task should have already actually been completed. But some people, could potentially give money to in advance. I do know there are instances where we have given vendors money up front. It's just like how adamantly the county probably would want to go after the sub to make the third party cure that deficiency.
Right.
If, I'm just using this as an example, say for instance, we subbed with somebody who went bankrupt, and then the third party didn't perform, we don't have anybody at that point to go after. I mean, that maybe, and Awatif probably could help with this, maybe that would be the instance where the insurance would kick in. I'm not sure. Where I'm saying like we would go after the third parties,
Yeah.
the subrecipients' insurance, because they have to have insurance as well. We're not only the ones who have to have insurance, the sub has to have insurance, and I'm assuming they make their third-party vendors have insurance as
The
well.
insurance in the nature of like a performance bond or something like that?
Correct.
Yeah.
So I know there are some performance bonds that they have to have, probably to do certain types of tasks, not every single.
Yeah, it really
bond, but-
depends on what the services that's
Yeah.
being provided. We had a taxi cab contract, for example, HHS, to take clients to and from their doctor visits. When the taxi cab company failed to perform, yes, we went after the performance bond.
A performance bond in that case? I see what you're saying, okay. All right. And who in fiscal, I guess, is primarily responsible for the administration of federal grants? Is Is that you guys?
It's the individual recipient. So like if HHS, for example, in Watt's
Be
example,
the fiscal person in the department.
Fiscal
Correct.
person
In the
particular
department.
Overseen by the fiscal office here.
here, correct. Mhm.
Okay, all right, good. Thank you for that. Okay, good. All right, any final questions or comments? Excellent presentation. Thank you for that. At this point, in our proceedings, I will, as I always do, remind the board members of our standard of review. So we always have that on our minds, which is to determine, one, whether the requesting entity has the authority to adopt, amend, or rescind the rule, and number two, whether the proposed rule conflicts with the county code. That is our standard of review. Ms. Tucker, we talked before the meeting began about the possibility of suspending the two-reading rule as it relates to the proposed adoption of the policy that you've presented. If you believe that it is important that we do suspend the two-reading rule and have this rule adopted immediately, would you give us a brief explanation for the record why that would be important?
Yes, I would like, if possible, to suspend the two-reading rule, just because the county is constantly getting in federal grants from various federal agencies, and we would like to adopt this rule as soon as possible. So once we get this adopted, we can roll it out and provide the training so that the end users become subject matter experts as quickly as possible, and that we're ensuring that we're in compliance,
Okay,
yes, with these rules.
Fulfilling our audit requirements.
okay, yeah, right. Okay, well, I guess with that, I'll now entertain a motion to suspend the two-reading rule. Is there a motion to suspend the two-reading rule? We have 4 people here now, so we can actually do that under the county code.
I move to suspend the two-reading rule.
Thank you, Awata. Second.
I'll second it.
Greg has seconded it. Any discussion on that? All right, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? All right, clerk, please have the record reflect that all 4 members of the board in attendance voted in the affirmative to suspend the two-reading rule. So calling the main question, is there now a motion to adopt the proposed rule?
So moved.
Greg has moved it. Any second?
I second your motion.
Watif has seconded the motion. Any discussion on this? Hearing none. All right, calling the question. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Clerk, please have the record reflect that all 4 members of the board in attendance voted in the affirmative to adopt the proposed rule as presented by Ms. Tucker. And again, thank you. At this time in our proceedings, Ms. Tucker, please proceed with your next presentation on the adoption of the proposed rule simply entitled Grant Policy.
The second policy that's being presented today is grants policy, which is, the first policy is in reference to federal awards. This grants policy is in reference to all funding that's received from all funding sources. So this would be applicable to, it doesn't have a dollar threshold, it's just applicable to all grants or awards that we receive from any outside entity. This policy is a little bit more in-depth than the other policy, just because this policy can't be referenced like on a federal site. So this policy talks about, like the other policy talks about grant monitoring, grant reporting, accepting grants, and it's more of a procedural type of document. So this involves, well, like how do you, what is the process for accepting a grant? Well, this document's going to like the Board of Control or some other direct board for authority before accepting a grant. It goes into in-depth processes about how that looks and the timing involved in it. It also talks about cash management, indirect costs, the type of grant, time and effort reporting. It talks about sub-grants as well. It talks about how to close out a grant. It talks about year-end procedures. And so that's the difference between the two policies, is that this one is a little bit more in-depth because it includes all grants and sources, where the other policy just talks about federal awards. Are there any questions about this policy specifically?
Solely, this would include if a grant came from the general fund, from the levy, from a special revenue. And it
Correct.
typically encompasses how a grant is handled from beginning to end,
Correct.
beginning of its life to the end of its life.
Correct. And then this also covers, like, for example, if the Cleveland Foundation gave Cuyahoga County an award, maybe to do a study on something, so that would be covered in this policy as well. So it's not just grant dollars, it's like awards.
So it's both awards that we receive and grants that we make?
The grants that we make are sort of covered under the subrecipient policy, but it's not where we say, for instance, I'm just making up an example, but Chris Ronay wanted to create an award where he's given some dollars to maybe some students to do task X. That's not covered in here. That wouldn't be covered in this policy.
What, for
Is that what
example-
you're referencing,
Well, I'm
like
thinking more
that?
like a grant that comes out of the development department. To make a, you know, an ED project or a housing project out of.
That's
housing
not covered in
community.
this as well.
That's not covered
That's
here.
not covered in here either. So it's mainly when we're the recipient of.
Receiving money.
Correct, not the awarder, unless it's like a sub-recipient type of relationship. But where we're the initiator of a grant, like you described, where it's coming out of development, no, that's not covered in this policy.
Okay.
That might be a good idea to create a policy for that, but this is, thank you, Greg. They'll probably hate you for that, but yeah, this is just where we're the recipient of awards, grants and awards.
And for my edification, how much do we receive, I guess, in grants at all levels, ballparking it in any given year?
Oh, boy, I don't remember. I'm trying to think of how much we get in federal awards, and that's probably like over $20 million. So
Okay,
the smaller awards aren't as large, but I would say anywhere probably between 20 and 30 million. I can check that and get back to you because I'm not really sure. I'm just thinking about the CFA.
I'm just trying to get a sense of scale of what this policy is covering.
Yeah, I'll definitely get back to you and let
Okay.
you know that.
All right. And
Can run that out of budget 3,
Yeah,
lifetime budget. Should include-
and we actually have it. Well, I just don't know the amount off the top of my head.
who authored this proposed policy?
It was a committee of us, led by
Okay.
Katie Gallagher.
Okay.
So it was the people who actually monitor the grants currently in the various departments, fiscal and OBM. So it was kind of like a group effort.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. And did anything pre-exist this policy?
We
Anything
had
of this
a-
nature prior to now? 'Cause
we
we've been
had
receiving
a-
grants for a long time.
Yeah, we had a like a one-page document, or it might have been 2 pages, that talked about at a very high level of what grants, accepting grants, but it kind of left it up to the departments, and so there was no uniformity around that. I mean, departments knew what they were doing specifically for the grants that they received, but there are some important things from an internal control and risk perspective that everybody needs to do. So that's why we created one policy that everybody has to use. And when I say everybody, that's not only non-executive agencies, but, I mean, not only executive agencies, but it's non-executive agents. Everybody is under the Cuyahoga County financial reporting structure, so that's everybody.
Commissions, everyone
Those are commissions too. Okay,
Yes.
okay,
processing through our system where they're using this policy.
okay.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Very good. All right, any other, I guess, comments or questions on the proposed grant policy? Hearing none, then I guess I'll go back, Ms. Tucker, to the two reading rule question. Could you state for the record, if you believe it to be the case, that it is, why, I guess it's important that we suspend the two reading rule as it relates to the proposed adoption of this policy?
I would like to suspend the two reading rule as well for this, just because we are currently have grants that we're monitoring. It's getting close to the end of the year, so we want to make sure that everybody's implementing and using these policies from a control and risk perspective. It's important to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And then we would like to do some training as close to the end of the year as possible so that we can ensure that everybody's doing their end of the year reporting correctly.
All right, thank you. And with that, I'll entertain a motion to suspend the aforesaid two reading rule. All right, thank you, Awat. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, Greg, any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, clerk, please have the record reflect that all four members of the board in attendance have voted in the affirmative to suspend the rule. Now calling the main question, is there a motion to adopt the proposed rule? All right. That's all right. You're moving to adopt the rule? All right, is there a second to Awatef's motion?
I'll second.
Thank you, Greg. All right, any further discussion on this proposed rule as presented by Ms. Tucker? Hearing none, calling the vote, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. All right. Clerk, please have the record reflect that all four members of the board in attendance voted in the affirmative to adopt the proposed rule as presented by Ms. Tucker. The motion carries. Thank you very much for your time and your excellent presentations, Ms. Tucker.
Thank you, thank you.
And now, next item on the agenda is miscellaneous business. Is there any miscellaneous business to be discussed? Clerk Buckholz, is there anything that, to your knowledge, on the agenda for 2 weeks from now?
I have not received any submitted rules for the agenda for 2 weeks from now.
All right, and has the deadline passed for that?
It has.
Okay. All right. Okay, I'll come back to that in a moment. Last item on the agenda, but I guess the other published agenda item relates to public comment unrelated to the agenda. Ms. Tucker, you're the only one in the audience at this point. Do you have any comments on any matters that you can think of that are unrelated to the agenda, which has been your agenda, by the way? All right. Go team, go. All right. Very good. All right, so then it appears then, last item is adjournment. It appears that we will not be meeting again in 2 weeks, which is Halloween, October 31st, there being no business to attend to, which is probably good because I didn't want to see Walter in a Halloween costume anyway. So I guess we will then tentatively plan for a meeting 2 weeks after Halloween, provided that there is actually something to consider and discuss, and and Clerk Buckholz will be in contact with us about that. So I guess with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.